Hi everyone, thanks for coming. It's great to see so full a room. My name is Dominic Wellington, I'm an enterprise architect at SnapLogic, and we'll be talking about generative AI, same as pretty much every other presentation today, but I'll try to make it interesting. So one big question is, what are we trying to do with the generative AI? And the answer that I'd like to investigate with you is we would like to simplify the data stack. Data stacks are extremely complicated at this point in time. People have been building them out for a long time. There are a lot of products, a lot of tools, a lot of different use cases within organizations that have each mandated their own tools. And it's time to simplify things so we can actually get things done rather than just playing with different tools. But first I want to take a step back and introduce you to a gentleman called William Stanley Jevons. Now, as you can see from his magnificent beard, as a Victorian economist from the middle of the 19th century. Normally, when someone looks like this gets introduced in a set of IT slides, it's because there's some sort of computer pioneer, inventor, something along those lines. Which Jevons was. He invented this thing called the logical piano for obvious graphical reasons. It's a mechanized computer. He actually one-upped Babbage, who famously never actually got his analytical engine built. So there is actually one of these built in 1869, and you can go and see it at the Science Museum, who are customers of ours, by the way, and we'll tell you all about it. But that's not why I wanted to talk about William Jevons. He is actually much better known for something called Jevons paradox. So he was hired by the British Empire, as was, to figure out how much coal do we need to run this enterprise? What does the demand look like? And he went off and tried to calculate, how much coal do we need to ship goods and soldiers and whatever back and forth across the whole of the British Empire. And he came up with this really interesting finding that actually the cheaper you make it to access something, the easier you make it to use more of it, the more of it people will use. And this is Jevons paradox, that the easier it is to use something, the more people will use. So let's bring that back home, that nice little history lesson, and talk about data. How does increasing the ease of use of data change things? Well, a lot of organizations that we talk to look something like this. One team had a particular requirement, a particular need, and they gathered a bunch of data, and they bought or built tooling in order to work with that particular set of data. And if you're in that team, you're living very happily, you have everything that you need right there. If you need to get up and down to the data, if you need to get access to it, if you need to feed new data in, then you might have a bit more of a problem. And that's a situation that far too many organizations are in. There are these, sometimes they're called data silos. I don't find that quite expressive enough. I prefer this graphical representation. That team is perfectly happy. They have everything they need at the top of that little pinnacle. It's a monastery in Greece, I believe. And the monks at the top of the monastery pinnacle are living very well. It's just very, very difficult to get in and out. Those monks are hermits. That's fine for them. Most data teams and organizations, they're not trying to be hermits. They do actually need to make it a little bit easier to expose the data to other teams, to work together with other teams' data, and so on. So let's say we can, build a bunch of rope bridges between the different islands of data. That would be a good start. But then we run into a second problem. The data is not the same. The data is all multifarious. The same data about the same logical entities that you and I might think of is actually represented differently by different teams. Some of them think about customers, others think about users, others think about just a generic first name, last name. It's all actually the same people, but you can't easily do a search from blah where blah. It doesn't quite work that way. You have to figure all of that out. And unless you do, it's so hard to use the data that you can't actually quickly do that. You can't quickly make use of it. So a bunch of good ideas, things that people really want to do, that the organization would really benefit from, stay in the, that would be nice to have. If instead we can democratize access to the data, if we can make it easy to access, easy to interpret, easy to use and consume, then more people will do that. More ideas will be able to get off the ground. If everything that we needed to do required us to, like we did when I was starting out, you may be able to tell, I've been doing this for a while. When I was starting out, you had to go and buy a piece of hardware from Sun, and you had to rack it in your data center, and then you had to deploy Oracle to it. It took ages, it cost a lot of money, so a lot of good ideas couldn't justify that investment. If, on the other hand, your good idea is something that you can just turn on, a lot more good ideas will actually get delivered. They'll be able to get over that bar, and that makes the data itself more valuable because it gets used more. And that is exactly what SnapLogic can deliver. SnapLogic is all about making it fast to access the data. The faster you can get access to data, the better, and the more people are doing it, the cheaper it will be, because it's a question of paying a few tens of dollars in SaaS consumption and not tens of thousands to buy the Sun hardware and the Oracle license and. And to give you an example of that, here in the UK, one of our customers is AstraZeneca, a big drug manufacturer, got a much higher profile somehow since 2020, mysteriously, how that happened. What's interesting about AstraZeneca is they have hundreds, if not thousands, of users outside of the IT department. Fewer than 10% of the AstraZeneca users work for IT. All of the others are off in the lines of business, investigating drug trials or whatever they need to be doing, their particular business requirement. But because through SnapLogic, it's very, very easy for data to be accessible wherever it needs to be to whoever needs to access it, they're able to get enormous benefit from doing that. They have over 1,000 pipelines going into Salesforce. Each one of those is somebody who had a requirement to access Salesforce data, and they will just click, 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 and build that. They process billions of documents, tens of billions of documents per month across millions of pipeline executions. Again, each one of those is something that somebody in the organization needed, and because they had SnapLogic, they didn't have to start writing code or finding someone who would write the code for them and explaining to them what they needed. They were able to just get down to business, get started. So that's the technical, mechanical, getting access to data piece. But once you've got the data, is it useful? And a big thing that changes how useful data is can I trust it? When I'm shown a dashboard, do I feel confident about what this dashboard is showing? Don't try to figure this out, this is just from Google Images. It's just a random dashboard. But if you're presented with this, does it mean anything? Maybe. Do I trust how this dashboard was built? Probably not. I probably want to peel it back and understand what queries it was running, where and against what. And if I don't trust the data, I won't take decisions based on it. The whole idea of the data-driven enterprise is reliant on people actually trusting the conclusions that the data gives them. If I look at this and say, nah, don't believe it, I'm going to do what I was going to do anyway, then all of that investment in fancy tooling is completely wasted. People don't trust data that they just presented with black box. They trust data that they understand. They understand where it came from, they understand how it was calculated and filtered and sorted and queried, and they understand recommendations that feel right to them, that fit with their existing view of the world. If I get shown something that says AstraZeneca has suddenly gone from 29 billion documents to 200 billion documents, that seems weird. I want to understand why. If they say they've gone from 29 to 30, you say, okay, that's fine, that's normal variance that's going on. That sort of thing. So a big part of that is understanding, therefore, how these recommendations, these analyses are generated and presented. And this is where we start to talk specifically about generative AI. A lot of the conversation out there is about code generation. If I ask ChatGPT to pull a name out of thin air, to do something for me, to build me some code, it'll come back with 100,000 lines of Python or whatever it might be. Is that doing what I know, what I wanted it to do? Maybe. Now I have to, either if I read Python, I've got to go and read through all of that and understand it. If not, well, I have to go and find someone who understands Python and explain it to me. Either way, it takes a minute. SnapLogic does not work that way. SnapLogic lets you build a graphical pipeline by connecting together these logical bricks. If you get the AI to generate it for you, you have this graphical representation and you can look at it, you can understand. Okay, it's reading a file, it's parsing some CSV, it's mapping the fields. That is what I wanted it to do. Excellent, we're good to go. And this sort of increased business agility is what we're able to deliver to ITV, who I believe also have a speaking session today, tomorrow, I forget exactly. So the problem that they had was this massive transition that all broadcast media are going through with a new challenge from streamers, and they were having to figure out how to get a lot more digital, a lot more dynamic and agile with the way they use data. Again, mostly data that they already had, but they had built a whole lot of things in a previous technological generation that nobody really understood anymore. That was built by Bob. Well, where's Bob? Bob retired. That sort of thing is a problem. And so they had to be able to understand what was going on with their existing integrations. They had to be able to build new integrations, build them faster, be a lot more proactive, a lot less hand coding of integrations and understanding how to read and write the code, and a lot more flexible to changing environments, to swapping out HR and finance platforms for newer SaaS tools from their existing on-premises tools. We were able to help them do that in a way that was not disruptive to all of the other integrations because we provided an abstraction layer over the top. So those are a couple of examples of what a couple of customers here in the UK were able to do with SnapLogic. But those are borne out across all of our customer base. Those of you who've been in the vendor space, I know there are a bunch of vendors here today, may recognize Forrester Total Economic Impact studies. If you're on the customer side, let me just assure you these are massively, massively painful to go through, because Forrester wants to go and talk to a whole bunch of your customers and they want to understand, did it deploy easily? Did it do what you thought it would do? How hard was it to do it? And they will take notes and go back and tabulate and quantify everything. But what we were able to show was that within 6 months, the customers were breaking even on their investment in SnapLogic, from first deployment to getting enough value to pay for the tool inside of 6 months. That's basically free money. Anything less than 12 months is free money in accounting terms. 500% return in 3 years. And a really interesting one, we're helping them deploy their other tools, their other projects, 70% faster in some cases. Not everything, not across the board, but up to 70% faster deployments of other things. So shortening the pipeline, shortening the deployment timelines for these other things. And that's all just additional value on the top. Because this is not about getting rid of everything, it's about using data that you already have, integrating systems that you already have, that are already providing value, just making that value more easily accessible. So I flew in from Italy, I'm based near Milan. This is a standard Milan tram. These things have been on the streets, rails, I suppose, for over 100 years. They keep on operating, they're continuing to deliver value. The original investment has been paid off decades ago, but they're continuing to deliver enormous value to the city of Milan. In fact, if you ever go to Milan, there are a couple of these that have been turned into restaurants. You can book a table, it's a tram, and it'll take you around. Really cool experience. That's the sort of thing that we want to do with your existing past investments into IT. So where does the AI come in? Again, just let's remind ourselves of that. Well, the interesting thing about all of this AI stuff is it can seem like it happened just yesterday. This event last year, we were not talking about generative AI in the same way. It was all data mesh, data fabric, and that's all still there, but it's just not the latest thing. The thing is, if you're just trying to shoehorn generative AI and large language models and what have you into a portfolio, whether it makes sense or not, that's probably not going to be that successful. For SnapLogic, this is just the latest step on a journey that we're already on. So we started, as I mentioned, with a low-code, no-code development environment. That means you can drag and drop your components, you can build them up yourself. You don't have to be a programmer. People in the lines of business can get directly involved with implementing their own requirements, their own ideas, their own ways of delivering value. We then went and built accelerators, pre-built connectors, snap packs, we call them, to make it easier to do that. So if we realize a whole bunch of people were doing the same things, well, let's just give them a template so they don't have to fill in a bunch of boilerplate data. We continue to do that. We have over 1,000 of these things out there. We have a unified platform. We integrate data, we integrate apps, we integrate API, all in one place, all using one same skill set, one same security model, one same management interface. It's all there. The AI assistance is something we've been working on for 4 years already. So we have a component called Iris, which will do things like it will recommend the next logical brick in your integration, your next logical snap. It will say, you just pulled a bunch of data from Salesforce. Mostly when people pull data from Salesforce, they want to map the fields. So here's a mapper component. Is that what you want? Yes, okay, good. Now that you map the data, you probably want to put it somewhere. How about writing it to Snowflake? And you can say, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. Off you go. And so that's really helpful, but because we had that basis of AI assistance, it was easy for us to add generative integration as the next logical step. So going from what some people call pro code, writing Python, Perl, what have you, to no code and low code is a democratization, is an acceleration. More people can get involved, they can work faster. Going to generative AI, explaining in plain English, here's what I want, do it for me, that further extends the number of people who can get directly involved with this process. You can just say, I would like to build a pipeline to show the benefits of participating in Big Data London, pull it from all of these sources and make me a dashboard. And it will go and do that. That's even easier than if I had to drag and drop it myself, so more and more people can get involved. Again, Javens tells us the easier that we make it to build something, to do something, the more people will do. And so that's what SnapGPT is all about. You can guess from the name what this does, SnapLogic with GPT. So it builds on our existing transformation and mapping tools that we already had. These are already AI-enabled capabilities that we had. And it adds the ability to capture the intent the users have even better, even earlier in the process from an even wider potential audience of users. And so that lets them build out their pipeline just by talking to the AI, or vice versa. They can do the same thing, they can, in reverse. They can look at a complex pipeline that someone else has built, and they say, explain this to me, what does this do? And the thing will go through and it will say, well, it's pulling from here and it's transforming in that way and it's running some logical checks, and then it drops the data there. Excellent, now I understand it, now I can start modifying it, now I can understand if my idea is a duplicate, whatever it might be. And so this is something that practitioners really love. We try not to trot out too many of we are in the top right of such and such a report, but we do really like the fact that we're in the Gartner Peer Insights, the fact that we're in the Trust Radius, because these are ratings from actual users of the platform. People who've used the platform and they've taken the time to go to talk to these analysts and say just how much they liked it. And these are just a sampling of a few of the customers. Not to say we have a lot of big customers, but to say we are in every walk of life, we're in every industry, all sorts of companies that you can see there. This is something that is potentially for everybody. We do not see this as being just for a certain group of users, a certain industry, a certain region, or what have you. So if you're interested in that, we are also having our own event, the Integrate Tour, which will be here in London on November the 2nd. And we're going to have some excellent speakers, so from AstraZeneca, from GHD, from the lifeboats, so some very, very hands-on speeches from people who are using these tools to transform their own business and to enable their colleagues to work that much better. If you're interested, I'll leave the QR code on the screen for a minute so that you can all capture that. But with that, that was what I absolutely wanted to get through, and I would love to take some questions from the audience at this point. Do we have a microphone that we can... There's a microphone at the back if anyone has some questions.
Hi, thank you. What sort of guardrails do you have in place for your user population to prevent, massive sprawl or resource drains in your pipelines?
Yeah. So, did the audience hear the question? Yeah, okay. So I don't have to repeat that. So the answer is twofold. So the platform is built with certain guardrails already in place. So a question people have, for instance, is how do you ensure that sensitive data is not being sent in places it shouldn't be? The advantage that we have is we have a cloud-based control plane. If you're talking SaaS tools, you can do that all in the cloud. You don't have to deploy anything. If you have tools in a data center or in your own private cloud, then the pipelines run on a component that we deploy locally. So all of the data remains inside your own firewall, in your own control, and so you don't have to worry about things going through the firewall that shouldn't. The only thing that we send through the firewall is metadata. So pipeline definitions down, pipeline execution data up, but no actual customer data, credentials, anything like that. So that's the baseline that we build on. Same thing with the integration of the large language model in SnapGPT. We're not actually sending it, here are the Snowflake credentials. No, we're just asking it to build a pipeline. Then the pipeline gets sent down to the execution engine, and that's where you add in, and here are my Snowflake credentials, but they were never sent to the LLM. The data, let alone, was never sent to the LLM, so that doesn't leak. When it comes to, what was that, the actual thrust of your question about the sort of the process methodological things, that's something that we're actually working on right now with some of these larger deployed customers, because it can happen. The risk is that the citizen developers will get just a little bit too enthusiastic. So we're using AI there too to identify similarities with existing pipelines, so we can recommend, hey, you've got 17 pipelines that all seem to do the same thing. How about we bring them together, have one, and everyone calls it and parameterize it? There are capabilities in the tool already. There is more coming as we work together with our customers to implement more of these, and quite frankly, as the tools that we rely on get more sophisticated. But that's the sort of benefit that you have through our model, that the IT, the central IT, they don't have to worry about being hands on keyboard for every request that comes in, so they can do that sort of work. They can build shared components, they can share best practices, they can run education, and they can focus more on that aspect of things. That answer your question? Yeah. I'm not hearing.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question. Who owns the data? Basically, me as a customer, do you own the data SnapLogic, or do you share the data industry-wise to other customers that you have? For example, you have a university as a customer, so if you have other university customers, do they see similar insights as the industry insights that you have, and something like that? That makes sense.
Makes sense. So we're looking into doing more of that sort of thing. So right now, customer data is each customer's. They don't see anything. The pipeline definitions themselves, those are in a shared environment, and we're trying to figure out how best to use them for training. We've done some training on those. We use that, but in a kind of offline method. So we anonymize them before using them for training. Obviously, the grail is to be able to say, hey, you are in the university sector, here is specific advice and learnings by industry. We're not there yet, but it's something that we're looking at, yeah. Our chief data scientist is actually a professor at the University of Santa Barbara, and so he is very, very close to that research aspect, yeah. Any question here?
Hello. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that SnapLogic is trying to democratize data by lessening, or at least making different, the skills that one would need to take data from its source to a dashboard where then one can analyze it. So my question is, what kind of skills or knowledge does one need in order to not waste like one's time with something like SnapLogic? Because I mean, it sounds really good, but it almost sounds a bit too good to be true.
Yeah.
Like that one doesn't need Python, or one doesn't need like an understanding of data.
Yeah. So you definitely don't need Python, but you do need an understanding of data. You need to understand what specific data you have, how you're trying to use it, what use you're trying to make of it. So the idea is, so the way things happen today, all too often, is either you have a data scientist who has a very good understanding of data and are probably at best a middling Python programmer, or you have a super hardcore Python programmer but they're not a data scientist, Or even worse, you have the line of business person who's a marketing specialist, whatever, and they don't understand either data or Python. And so you have to get those people in a room and they have to explain to each other the requirements and the possibility and the technical constraints. And then you often wind up with something that isn't really fitting anybody. So what we're trying to do is break that backlog, so to be able to have the person who is closest to the data, to the requirement, to the use case, who knows what they want, and make it easier for them to build either the whole thing, ideally, or at the very least to build a skeleton that they can hand to someone who has a deeper understanding of the SnapLogic platform to fill out the last little bits. And you can get as technical as you want in here. You can run code, you can run raw SQL queries, you can run a raw REST API request. We try to make it so that you don't have to do that routinely, that's the exception that you need occasionally when you're doing something a little bit out of the ordinary. Yeah. One more question? Yeah. Two more questions.
Thank you. You mentioned your shared environment. Can you just explain some more to me about any risks or mitigation or leakage of data?
Sure. So the only part that's shared is the control plane and potentially the Cloudplex if you're talking to SaaS tools. The control plane doesn't see any customer data at all. It only ever sees the pipeline definitions. The customer data, the credentials to talk to the third-party systems we're integrating with, all of that remains in the execution layer in the data plane. So that already takes a big problem off our plate. We don't want to deal with that problem, so an easy way not to deal with that problem is not set yourself up to have it in the first place. When it comes to Cloudplex, there is the potential, supposedly, to leak data. In industries where that's a concern, mostly they're not using SaaS anyway, and so at that point we deploy a dedicated component in the customer's own private cloud, in the customer's own data center, and that is entirely under the customer's control. They can see exactly what that does. So we ensure that way, just rather than having to put in controls after the fact, we make sure that we never even see the data in the first place that could be sensitive. The next stage of that is, for the longest time, we only had one control plane worldwide that was hosted in the US. We just recently launched the EMEA control plane, because even if it's only metadata, sometimes metadata can be sensitive, and so we eventually bit the bullet and spun up an EMEA control plane that's just gone live last week, week before last, very recently. And as you can imagine, the really hard part of these projects is going from one to more than one. Now that we've got two, we can probably quite easily have many of them around the world in different regions, and that then opens up more possibilities in terms of control of the data. You could potentially have your own private dedicated control plane. Why not? That answer the question? Yeah. And one more question, and then I think they're going to kick us out.
I just had a question about the kind of integration of data sources, and I wanted to know if there's any limitations on what kind of data sources it can handle. Like, because at my where I work, one of the problems we have is that we collect, because it's marketing, they collect a lot of data from like these kind of dynamic web pages, and it can't really easily be automated. So we try and do web scraping, but it doesn't always work. I was just wondering, is there any limitations with the data source you can handle, or is it that we can, like, even with SnapLogic, we could get it from those kinds of web pages?
That sounds a little bit specific. We'd have to take a look at that. In principle, there isn't really any limitation. We have, like I say, generic low-level integrations. We can read a file, we can talk to an API, we can talk to a database directly. We'd have to figure out if this is something that we could retrieve via HTTP or what have you. And then once we have the data, the platform is designed to be agnostic, to make it super easy to transform data from one format to the other and munge it in whatever wonderful way. And now the large language models make that even easier. We just finished a project with a pharmaceutical company who are parsing just reams and reams of text in PDFs, not naturally machine readable, but being able to summarize that and exposing it in a more usable, useful way. So in principle, we can access anything. In practice, we'd have to take a look. But for those who are interested, by all means, come around to booth 419. We can look at a live demo with the actual product, with SnapGPT if the Wi-Fi gods permit, and we can go a little bit deeper into specific questions like this. But in the meantime, thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.